All right, welcome back everyone to Art 371. This is Introduction to Millumin, wonderful video mapping software out of France. And today we're going to go in a little more detail about the differences between masking and mapping in Millumin. And then we'll also take a few minutes to look at some of the effects options that can be applied to individual layers in Millumin. All right, just as a little bit of a step back, I am connected to a projector you can see there. We are recording um, on both my camera in the bottom right corner and screen capturing here. I have this set up as a separate display on my Apple Macintosh system. And if I open my display preferences, in case you don't have that in your top bar, that's this little checkbox here. You can always go to your system preferences and also bring up display as well. Okay, but if you click that little show mirroring options in the menu bar, you'll get this lovely setup here up at the top right. And if I go to arrangement, you can see there it is. There's my external display. It's off to the right. As I click on it, the whole thing gets a nice red outline around it, allowing me to identify the screen. So I always like to step back and make sure everybody is set up, that they're not mirroring, that they have set that up as an extended desktop. All right, let's create a new project in Millumin. So I'm going to create a new project. And I'm going to go ahead and just save right out of the gate. I'm going to go up here to project and save this and save it to my desktop. All right, cool. And same thing, I'm going to hit this little gray arrow on the left here. I'm just going to move over to get a little more screen real estate. Bring this down. So if I hit this little green arrow, I can extend out my library. And I have an external drive here. I like to run all of my video from an external drive so that I can save resources on my main drive, so it doesn't have to like double access running the application and loading video. So all my video is on here. So I'm going to go to live video here and grab some stuff again. I'm grabbing this folder of body video and the new animated light folder. That should give me enough to work with for today. And then I'm going to go ahead and save. All right. And all of these, I believe, are MP4. Oh no, these are actually MOV. So a lot of these older ones are photo JPEG format. It's actually really hard to export photo JPEG on a Mac these days because QuickTime, the newest QuickTime, doesn't really support it anymore. I've had a hard time finding that codec. So these days I'm pretty much using MP4 or HAP format, which we've gone over in some past lessons. All right, so I've got these videos to play with. I'm going to go ahead and just drag one of these videos down. I'm going to go ahead and grab this I one, and for now we're just going to use the dashboard. We could use the timeline method, but for right now we'll use dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that down onto my layer. And there we go. I'm going to turn off my audio. And you can see that lovely little square. If I, again, hit this info button here, I can see more info about it. So that's only an 800 by 450 video, and it even says video is in photo JPEG format under a QuickTime wrapper. And so that's why it's so small inside of here, because if I go to my output settings up here, you'll notice this projector that I have, my Pico projector, is 1920 by 1080 resolution. So at 800, that's less than half the resolution of what the projector can do, which is why that video is so small. If it was 1080p, it would have come in, full scale, super sharp. But that's fine. We'll keep it small. We're going to shrink it down anyway. So I'm going to move this around, and let's just discuss again the difference between mapping, masking, and then just standard transform. So right now, all I can really do to this clip when I'm in just regular transform mode is I can scale it. I can rotate it if I go to the corner and drag. And obviously I can click on it and move it around my screen. I can also do all this up here in the top right. I call this sort of my attributes panel because it has all sorts of different information about the clip. If I click off the clip, you'll notice nothing will be there anymore. If I click on my layer or on the layer in the viewport here, either one will work. Now, so if I click on that over here on the right, you can see I can again change position. I can move it very slowly left and right, and very precisely by the pixels up and down. I can scale it by a percentage amount. Not only that, but if you hit this little gear icon to the right, You can separate it so that you can scale it X and Y dimensions. A lot of people don't realize that's there, but maybe I want to stretch my video in some weird way, then I can stretch just the horizontal, or I can stretch just the vertical. So kind of a nice feature. You can always go back and turn that off. There's also a few other controls in here we'll talk about later. And then I can rotate it. Obviously, I can dial in a specific rotation that I want on that particular layer. Okay, undo that. I also have an opacity control here, which is really nice. So if I bring that up and down, I can play with the opacity of that layer, fade it in and out. Now, if I have another layer, I'm going to bring in another layer video. So I'll drag it number 1 above number 2. You can always move the order of your layers there. And I can make this a little bit bigger here for us as well. And say I bring in this Duchamp eyes clip that I have. And if I put these right underneath each other, and then I go and click back on the top layer, my original eye layer, I have blending modes just like out of Photoshop. So if I click here, I can multiply that layer, darken that layer, and onward. There's screen, there's lighten, there's add, there's overlay, hue, saturation, color, luminosity. And then we get into some fun ones after that that actually deal with alpha channels and luma channels. And so as an example of that, I'm going to go ahead and move my eye layer over there. You can see once it's not layered on top of it, it doesn't really do much. So I'm going to take that back to normal. But say I bring in another layer and I use a black and white image. So I happen to have a clip here that's all black and white. I'm going to bring that in. It's a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go ahead and shrink it down. I'm going to set that on top. So I'll put it on top of the eye. Now watch what happens with this clip when I go down and start playing with alpha matte. Nothing on the alpha matte there, or alpha matte inverted. But if I go to luma matte, anything that is white becomes transparent. So this is kind of a different way of masking where you could have something on its own layer and then you could still like move this guy around and animate it. It's kind of a really neat feature to hold on to because you can produce, it doesn't have to even be a movie, it can be a still clip, like a still image if you want to create a mask this way. But it's using alpha channels to do it. If I do inverted, only the black remains and everything else becomes transparent. So kind of a cool way to play around with black and white layering on top of each other using these blend modes. Alright, so I'm going to go back and take that back to normal, move that down out of the way. So that's everything in that layer panel. If I move down a little bit further, now we get into mapping. And so I really want you to kind of see the differences between mapping. On a future lesson, we're going to talk about the slice editor. This is kind of a more advanced mapping system. But for right now, if I want to access mapping, I come up to the top of my screen and I'm kind of circling the area here. We've been in regular just transform mode. But if I click the next one in the list here, I get this lovely map icon. And you can see the minute I did that, the corners, see if I go back, go from little squares to big circles. Now I have the ability to kind of skew and warp my imagery, right? You can see how that eye is changing shape. And so if I want to map this onto the cardboard box, I can bring these over. Now it is stretching the image, keep that in mind. So it is warping the image a bit. And that's where masking kind of gives you a different option. But nonetheless, I am able to map that very nicely. And this is called free mapping. You even have this ability to do warping within that. So if I zoom in, by turning on this little warping tab over here in the attributes, I can have this cage and I can even like stretch and pull specific features on that and really play around, right? So say I wanted to bring maybe this one up a little bit and play around with this cardboard box. You can notice my cardboard box actually has a lid on it, which makes it a little bit more of a tricky kind of mapping, right? But if I bring this, I can actually map to the lip of that box and have that kind of come along next to it. Whoop. And then bring these just right below it although this is really warping my image a bit. But you can kind of play around with it and see where you want it. I probably don't want to get it that extreme, right? I'll bring these back down a little bit. If I wanted to, I can actually add another layer. This is 3x3 grid right now, but I could add a 4x3 grid, or actually I'm going to undo that. I'm going to do a 3x4 grid. And you can really start to play a bit. And I could say maybe like, what if I wanted 10? You know, and then really allow me to move and manipulate this grid in a lot more fine detail than what I'm currently able to do. So just kind of a fun way to be able to like bring a lot of surface detail. This really works out well if you're doing like, say, like a more complex geometry form, like you're trying to map onto like a soccer ball shape or onto a piece of origami, some kind of paper craft that you've been working on, something laser cut. But you know, I could work this for a while and get my whole lid mapped out at the top without too much warping and really bring this into place, right? So I've still got kind of a lip there that's showing up on the far right side, so I want to bring that in maybe a little bit more. I'm about 2 feet over from where my camera is, so my perspective compared to the camera that's viewing this is a little bit different. So always important to look from the perspective that your audience is looking at. Now that I bring that in, I can see how much further in I need to go. Now instead of looking at my screen, I'm actually looking at the video screen that's recording and just getting a slightly better idea of how I need to bring this mapping in to get the effect that I'm looking for. So mapping controls can be really, really fun in Millumin, really powerful. I'll bring this in just a little bit more. And this grid gives you a whole lot of potential for what you can kind of play with. There we go. Starting to get that edge to disappear a little bit. It's going to take more work, but we're getting there, right? And I'm able to get the whole top of the lid. You know, I have to play with it a little bit more. There we go. Something like almost right around there. And maybe like, there we go. I got that edge to disappear. So, lots of possibilities on how you can map using the mapping control, using the warping, adding division to that. And then there's even Bezier mode. Like, so if I turn on every single one of these points, if I zoom in, actually has Bezier control. So I can curve these as well, which gets really fun. You know, you can come in here and then kind of control, just like you would like a pen tool inside of Photoshop or Illustrator. And you can get all sorts of warps. So even if your object that you're trying to map around isn't a perfectly rectilinear object, you can move around curves and surfaces and all sorts of fun stuff. Now, like I said, it does warp the image, so keep that in mind, but sometimes we want to warp the image on a three-dimensional surface to make it look correct to the eye. So, lots of really fun stuff. If I want, I can always hit the reset button and everything goes back to the original. So always nice to have that option as well. All right, I'm going to turn off warping here. All that fun stuff. Below warping, we have effects. So if I unfold that again, if I click on the plus sign, you can see there's all these effects that are built in, and there's even some other ones that I have added in after the fact, so some user effects and things like that. I'll show you later on in a future lesson how to add more effects to the system. But right out of the bat, we have just sort of like image adjustment effects. So I can go to RGBA, I can affect obviously the alpha, which is sort of the opacity in a way. Take that back to 0. I can affect the red channel, make that go blue or more red. Obviously I can do green or less green. The image is getting kind of blown out on screen there. So I'm going to go back and do a brightness and contrast. And so maybe I want to take my brightness down on that so you can see that image a little bit better with the particular webcam that I'm recording this with. And I could also bring the contrast back up on it. This is probably the most common effect that I find myself using, is a brightness and contrast effect. And you can copy and paste these effects from layer to layer, which is really nice. But lots of really great adjustments to be made in here. There's also, if you want something a little bit more control, you can do levels. And we can play with like the amount of shadow versus highlights. Very similar to brightness and contrast, but a little different way that we do it and control it. Doesn't have like a histogram that you can control like you can in Photoshop, but you can separate red, green, and blue and do shadow, gamma, and highlight on each one. And there's a lot more. I'm not going to go over every single effect in here, but there's some fun ones in here. You know, I could apply a blur effect to the whole layer and kind of fuzz it out or bring it back into clarity. You know, there it is, super blurred out. And you can always delete them by hitting this little negative button. So if you don't want some of the effects, if your stack is getting large and you've kind of deactivated them, you can always delete them back out. I haven't done mirror. Oh, that just mirrors it to the opposite direction. So that just flipped it for you without you having to do that, which is really nice. And you can decide whether that's a vertical mirroring. Let me turn mirroring back on so I can make it go upside down or horizontal. Your choice. So if you don't, you just realize you needed to flip your image, but you don't want to have to like transform it because you've already mapped it. That's a quick one to do. There's a border, which adds like a little white border around the edges, and you can change that color to anything you want. It's kind of cool. So you should go through and play around with some of these on your own. There's so many to pick from. As we go down, there's actually little like animation elements that you can bring in. It will animate layers and make them rotate in space and do all sorts of stuff to them. You know, lots of different options we can play around with. And again, we'll get to some of these more advanced features in a future lesson, but I wanted you to understand kind of what's in here right now, that there are some really cool effects you can play with. You know, that's a really simple one that just makes it go black and white. And then down the road, we'll talk about even more that are in here. A glow effect that you can turn on, etc., etc. So you can think of some of these as like filters in Photoshop or some of the effects that you can add into like After Effects and Premiere. And then, like I said, there's a ton that people have created out there on their own that we'll talk about down the road. They give all sorts of neat effects to it, like bad TV, which brings in like a TV grain and makes it look like something. And you can affect the distortion of that TV screen and the noise level and all sorts of different fun stuff out there. So many that you can play around with. All right. Now, below that, we wanted to get to the other key difference here between mapping and masking. So we've looked at mapping, right? So I'm going to go ahead back up to the map here, and let's go ahead and reset the mapping so we just have a regular sized clip again, right? And I'm going to go back. Now I'm going to click on the third one on the list, which is masking. So I'm going to go ahead. You can press M to choose the map tool as well, which is a nice shortcut. So V is the regular selection tool. And I always forget what the shortcut tool is for mapping versus masking, I believe is M. Oh no, that's mapping. Masking, I'm not sure which one is mapping. Well, sometimes I can get this little helper to come up. So V to select the move tool, M to choose the map tool. I guess there isn't one for masking that I can find, but M will take you to masking, V will take you to selection tool, and then we get over here to masking. So what is masking? So masking is just like masking inside of After Effects or in a lot of other software you might have used. This is very similar to when I put that black layer on top of the other. So any that a thing is black is obviously going to hide the image. Anything that is white is going to kind of let it through. Now this doesn't really use the alpha channel white data, but anything that black is going to hide it. So as I scroll down, I've got my layer selected, and I go to mask. You'll see there's sort of a default mask in here that I could draw into if I want to. So I could make a point, and then hold another point, and I could draw out some kind of shape. And as soon as I complete it, you see that area just turn black, right? So you're not going to see the video where the black area is. It's kind of like this black box that I've put into the layer itself. Now, if I want to make it the opposite, I just hit the invert button, which is what I end up doing a lot. So I'm actually like making the rest of it disappear, and I'm kind of drawing in this mask as I move it around, right? So if I don't like that mask, I can delete it. I can hit the little minus button there, and I can hit a new mask, right? So I could say an empty mask again. And this time, I'm going to move the layer over a little bit, use the box lid idea that I was telling you about, and I'm just going to scale it a little bit too. So let's scale it down so it covers the whole thing. but maybe is just like right in the center there, right? And in combination, I'm going to map it a little bit just so that it's kind of looks correct to the eye a little bit. So I'm going to bring this in just a little. I don't want to stretch it too much, but I'm going to kind of correct it just a little bit, just so we can fit a little bit more of the eye onto the side of that box. And then I'm going to shrink it down a little bit more. That's pretty good, right? But maybe I don't want to go anything more extreme than that with my mapping. So now here's where I come and play with that mask, right? So I'm down in the mask section here. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to choose the third icon from the top, the mask tool. And I'm going to go ahead and start trying to map this out. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of draw in. I know I'm going to have a lid. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this in like I have the lid. And there we go. It's not on point yet, but that's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and invert it. Okay. So now I can move all these points after the fact. I can drag this guy into that edge. I can drag that one down to this edge. And I can move this guy in. And that one. That's pretty good. And now I'll do the opposite edge. And you'll see it's not warping the image, it's just hiding away part of the image, right? And same thing here. Right about there. Right about there. That is pretty good from this view. I think maybe this one could come down just a hair. And now you can see I've actually been able to mask and map these two together. And that's usually the order I do. I mask it as far as I want to distort the image. And then I map it first, and distort it down to as much as I want or as little as I want, just to kind of fit the overall overlapping shape. And then I add a mask from there. And there's some nice features in here. Obviously, I could like fade back so part of that image comes back and then the other one is masked. I rarely use that. I usually leave my map at 100%. I do use feather quite a bit. So feather will kind of soften the edges of the mask. As you can see, you can get a little bit of like a soft blur. Sometimes you want a soft blur. For this particular one, probably not so much because it's such an exact image, but in other situations you do want to soften a little bit. I will warn you, if you do a lot of feathering, it does increase your CPU and GPU use, so keep that in mind. You can also nudge the size of it a little bit here. You know, I could scale up my mask a little bit or scale down my mask a little bit, depending on what I want. If I want to make it like fit inside the borders instead of all the way at the top, I'm going to undo that, but it's nice to have that control there. Yeah, so really powerful what you can do. I just did a freeform mask. Obviously, you can also do like a circle mask. I'll show you over here. I'm going to navigate over to my left here. I'll go ahead and click on this guy. Whoop. I should have clicked on it with main control here. And so what happens if I go to mask mode again and I create a circle mask and I invert it? Now I have my video showing up inside of this lovely circle. Obviously, I could scale that up and make it fit a little bit more. Here's where the feather looks kind of nice. You can make it look like a little bit more of a ghosted circle where it's coming in. You know, don't go too much, depending on how close it is to the edge, but versus like none, and it's a really sharp edge, sometimes you just want to soften it a little bit, right? So you can have a lot of fun with it in here. Again, I can still play with these. You'll see these guys have actually been converted to Bezier points. A nice feature is I can convert any point in a mask to Bezier by holding down the Option key on my keyboard. So even if I go back to this guy, if I wanted to convert to a Bezier, I could hold down Option and suddenly that becomes a curve. Now obviously that threw off that mask, but I could bring in a curve to a linear point anytime I want by holding down Option, Alt on the keyboard. So lots of really great features here. Square, circle, triangle, empty mask, or just create your own empty mask and kind of style it from there. You'd have multiple masks, which is really nice. you know, I could always create a triangle on top of that and move that guy. These have an order, so if I wanted to grab the triangle, I just had to move the circle under it. Now I can grab the triangle, I'm going to bring that in, and I can invert that. Ooh, actually, that's not interacting the way I was hoping. But I could use them together this way, so one on top like that. I'm not sure if I move the triangle under it. Well, first I have to position it. So let's try an experiment here. I'm trying to see if I could get that to work together. I might just have to draw on the circle one and add additional points. But if I invert the triangle and then move it underneath, no, it's still not working. I thought maybe I could add that together, but not so much. So anyway, we could get just another layer, duplicate layer, and add that triangle in there if we wanted to. So lots of possibilities between masking and mapping. Last thing I'll show you in the attributes panel, and I'll just do it for this same circular clip. I can play around with the speed of my clip. I can slow it down, although you slow it down too much and it gets kind of choppy. So keep that in mind. Now that guy isn't blinking nearly as fast. He's running at 30%. I go back up to 100% and he's blinking all the time. I'm going to bring it back down. Let me do it on this layer actually. I think you'll see it a little bit better. So I'm doing it on the eye. Now if I slow that way down, you can see her eye is barely closing and opening. There it goes, nice and slow. It's at about 37%. Staying closed, and then eventually it'll open back up. If I go back up to 100, I can even speed it up and go to 180% or 150% and make it open and close all the time. So lots that you can play around with there under speed. I'm just going to go back to 100%. And you can also control the starting and stopping point of a clip. Like this clip right now, if I click on it over here, I can see it's about 1 minute in length. I could make it so that it starts at, say, the 30-second point of that clip and ends at the, or actually I have that at 21 seconds at 50 seconds, so it only lasts for a certain period of time, which is nice. So, you know, you can kind of play around with that a bit and play around with the speed and both the start and stop point. You can also have it loop, or you can have it like once it goes through, it freezes at the end. There it goes, it just finished its clip and now it's frozen, so it plays once through and then freezes, or once through and stop, or auto follow, which I haven't set up, but I know it allows you to clip like one clip through to the next, one to the next, to the next. We'll go over that in a future lesson. Most of the time I have my clips just looping infinitely, but that's where you can kind of control that. So this is sort of a media control, playback, speed, start, stop point, and looping control is all at the bottom here of the list. So that's the current media control, mask control, effects control, and then up at the top mapping, and then finally the layer control, which had all the opacity, position, scale, rotation. So I think we'll stop there. Hopefully that gets you comfortable. That's a lot to play with in Millumin. Hopefully that helps you understand the difference between masking and mapping, also how you can transform layers, how you can apply effects, and how you can control their playback. Have some fun. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for tuning in.